Welcome to Unholy Inquiry, where each tale leads you deeper into a labyrinth of mystery waiting to be uncovered. This time, join us as we delve into Miss Marple the Vicarage Visitor, a fan-crafted story that pays homage to the genius and sophistication of Agatha Christie's iconic detective, Miss Marplet. We are thrilled to have you with us on this captivating journey. Share your thoughts. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you spot any details we missed, your feedback is invaluable. Together, let's continue to shape even more thrilling enigmas. Chapter 1. A Stranger at the Vicarage. The rain pattered against the window panes of the vicarage in St. Mary Mead, a gentle rhythm that belied the tension accumulating within its walls. Miss Marple, perched in her favorite chair beside the fire, was knitting a bright blue woolen blanket when a sharp knock echoed through the still evening air. The clouds rolled low, casting a somber twilight over the cottage, and a flicker of unease trickled down her spine as she put down her needles. "I do hope that's not another knock from the cheerful Mr. Johnson from the bakery," she murmured, adjusting her spectacles. "I really can't bear any more of those stale ginger snaps." But when Reverend Julian Harris opened the door, Miss Marple's curiosity piqued. Standing in the doorway was a tall stranger with strikingly dark hair, slicked back to reveal a chiseled jawline. His tailored coat glistened with raindrops, and his eyes sparkled with an unsettling mix of charm and enigma. He bowed slightly, a courteous gesture that seemed almost practiced. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I am Edward Langston. I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," the vicar enthused, his fatigue forgotten. "I always enjoy a good visit. Please, come in. You'll catch your death in this rain." As Edward stepped into the warmth of the vicarage, Miss Marple observed him with keen interest. There was something about the way he held himself, a confidence tempered with an air of secrecy, like a rare piece of art deliberately hidden away from prying eyes. She could sense tension in the room, the kind that swirled around unsaid words and hidden motives. "I was just passing through," Edward explained, setting down a small leather case, "and I stumbled upon this charming little village. Your vicarage caught my eye, and, well, I've always been fond of quaint places." Miss Marple offered a soft smile, her mind racing with questions. With such a polished exterior, what kind of secrets lay hidden beneath this stranger's facade? She glanced at the vicar, who was somehow enthralled, a glimmer of admiration illuminating his features. "I must admit," Edward continued, "that I have come to St. Mary Mead on a personal errand. I once knew a Lady Cressida Wilkins, a formidable woman of this village. I came to pay my respects and gather some information." Ah, Lady Cressida, a name that carried with it whispers of old, feuds and faded glory. Miss Marple had known the lady well and remembered her sharp tongue and sharper wit. "Goodness, the Lady Cressida has been gone for quite some time now. But what errand could bring you back to us?" she inquired, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Simply an interest in her estate. I was hoping to find some artifacts of familial importance," he said, his tone casual. "Perhaps a journal or mementos that might have been overlooked." The vicar nodded thoughtfully, but Miss Marple remained unconvinced. Why would a man like Edward Langston come all the way to St. Mary Mead for mere artifacts? As Edward recounted tales of Lady Cressida's storied past, Miss Marple's sharp mind sifted through his words, detecting the layers of truth and deceit beneath the polished speech. The clock ticked, nearly unnoticed, as time slipped away. "Do join us for dinner," the vicar offered, extending the invitation as if he were an infatuated boy. "Ah, I wouldn't want to impose, Edward replied, though his eyes sparkled at the suggestion. Not at all. We shall have a delightful evening, Miss Marple interjected, and against her better judgment, she felt a flicker of intrigue toward the man. As the three settled around the modest dining table, the storm intensified outside, the wind howling as if trying to share secrets with those within. Over roast chicken and freshly baked bread, Edward continued to weave stories from a tapestry of charm, and Miss Marple's senses sharpened as she caught discrepancies in his narrative. I never expected Lady Cressida's estate to have such, interesting relics, he remarked, leaning slightly forward. I understand her son, Lord Geoffrey, was quite the character, a man of affluence, with a penchant for trouble, yes? The vicar chuckled, reassured by the familiarity of the topic. Indeed, poor Geoffrey, he always had a tumultuous relationship with his mother, which perhaps led to his eventual exile from the estate. Miss Marple noticed the flicker of emotion in Edward's eyes, calculating interest, perhaps a tinge of bitterness. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but she prided herself on her ability to notice the unnoticeable. Exile. That sounds rather severe. What could elicit such a response from Lady Cressida? She prodded softly, her tone weaving sincerity and deflection. Edward cleared his throat, his jaw tightening. Family matters can be complex, wouldn't you agree? As the conversation shifted, Miss Marple couldn't help but focus on Edward's demeanor. He lied with ease, but the effort showed just beneath the surface, like cracks forming silently on fine china. After dinner, with the storm still raging against the windows, the vicar excused himself to tend to a few parishioners who had stopped by. The moment he left, Miss Marple seized her chance. I do hope you won't mind my inquiries, Mr. Langston, she began, her voice steady. What, may I ask, did your relationship with Lady Cressida entail? The stranger stiffened, the charm evaporating like mist on a summer morning. Nothing of importance truly, he said, but his eyes darted to the small leather case he had put aside when entering the vicarage. Ah, but surely a young gentleman such as yourself must have something to share, she pressed, her intuition driving her questions. People often surprise me. With a fleeting moment of contemplation, he opened the case, revealing a series of old letters neatly stacked within. These are for my personal collection, he said tersely, before slipping one into his pocket. Just correspondence I found interesting, that's all. Unease rippled through Miss Marple. She leaned closer, her voice softening. They could reveal quite a lot if they're connected to the family, no? With a flash of irritation, Edward rose, his veneer cracking. You seem rather keen on others' secrets, Miss Marple. Perhaps one day I shall in turn uncover some of yours. Her heart raced, but her expression remained composed, every conclusion clicking into place within her mind. Oh, I have none worth noting, she replied, her calm defiance surprising him. That remains to be seen, he muttered, glancing at the door, and just like that he retreated, leaving the vicarage in intense silence. As Miss Marple sat in the aftermath, the shadows of doubt curled around her, drawing the tempest of thoughts into focus. Who was Edward Langston, and what did that singular letter in his possession entangle him in? Before she could ponder further, a strangled scream shattered the night, a sound fluttering through the rain that left even the storm momentarily muted. Good heavens, she exclaimed, rising as the vicar rushed back into the room, eyes wide with alarm. What was that? It came from the churchyard. With her heart pounding in tandem with the thunder, Miss Marple turned toward the door, ready to confront the darkness. After all, a stranger's arrival can often be a prelude to an unspeakable tale, and tonight's twisted narrative might just have begun unfolding with that agonized cry. Chapter 2: Whispers in the Dark. The following morning dawned dreary and heavy, the kind of day that seemed to wear the melancholy of the night before like a grey shroud. Miss Marple stood by her window, watching the rain dance furiously against the glass. Despite the tempestuous weather, a sense of anticipation crackled in the air. The village of St. Mary Mead was brimming with life, preparing for the much-anticipated evening fete. The chatter of villagers drifted through the open window, punctuated by laughter and the spirited exchange of pleasantries. Yet beneath it all, Miss Marple could sense an undercurrent of tension. Settling down with her knitting, she couldn't shake the troubling thoughts that had piqued her curiosity the night before. Edward Langston's sudden appearance and elusive motives haunted her mind. As the festivities unfolded outside, she couldn't help but feel that the tranquility of the village was but a careful facade, one waiting, perhaps, to crumble. "Miss Marple! Miss Marple!" The voice sang through the morning drizzle, high and exuberant. It was Dolly Murdoch, the vicar's sprightly housekeeper, and an unyielding source of gossip. "You haven't seen the decorations, have you? The bunting and lanterns look enchanting. Quite the sight against this gloomy weather." Miss Marple greeted her with a smile, but the warmth of daylight couldn't dispel the shadows lurking in her mind. "Morning, Dolly. I must admit, I've yet to explore the village today. But, tell me, what's on your mind besides the festivities?" Dolly's face brightened, and she leaned closer, her voice delightfully conspiratorial. "Oh, I heard the most curious thing. Old Mrs. Wickersham claimed she saw Mr. Langston last night near the churchyard after the scream. She said he was lurking about the graves, as if looking for something. Can you imagine? Whatever could he want there?" Miss Marple's ears perked up at the mention of Langston. "Is that so? And what did she see exactly? Did she mention what he was doing?" "No, just that he was there, and it struck her as odd," Dolly replied, her brows furrowing in thought. "Why would a gentleman come snooping around at such an hour?" "Quite," Miss Marple mused, her wheels turning. "Do you know if anyone else happened to be around?" "Just the usual folk. Young Timothy and Eliza were helping set up for the fete, and they could see the church from where they were. But no one else seemed to notice anything amiss," she lamented. Then gasped as if capturing a new thought. "But Mr. Langston, what do you think he wants? Is it true he's come to investigate Lady Cressida's estate?" "Indeed," murmured Miss Marple. "His intentions appear as murky as the skies above us." The name of Lady Cressida hung heavy in the air, ripe with history, and Miss Marple wondered what ghosts from the past had entwined themselves with the present. "And you mentioned Timothy and Eliza. How are they? Have they seemed well?" "They've been rather excited about the fete, but there's something odd about their energy today. Funny how it comes in bursts, isn't it? They've been quieter than usual." With Dolly's words hanging on her mind, Miss Marple resolved to pay a visit to the churchyard later that day, if only to draw closer to the intrigue surrounding Edward Langston. As the sun surrendered to the clouds, painting the village in a melancholic palette, Miss Marple made her way outside. Laughter lingered in the air as villagers busied themselves with decorations, but every giggle felt tinged with something, perhaps fear or secrets unwhispered. After a brief visit with a neighbor, she hijacked a moment to approach Timothy and Eliza as they hung colorful lanterns beneath the oak tree. "Hello, dears. How splendid the fete will be. But tell me, have you seen anything curious about Mr. Langston since last night?" Timothy shifted uncomfortably, his youthful face contorting as if wrestling with a secret. We did see him, Miss Marple, just after the scream. He was walking away from the church, quite fast. I thought he looked anxious, maybe." Eliza nodded vigorously. "Yes, and he had something in his hand. I couldn't see what it was, but I thought it must have been important." "Very curious," Miss Marple mused, her mind racing with possibilities. "And did you mention it to anyone?" "No, not really." Timothy hesitated. "We didn't want to trouble anybody. It seemed rude at a time when everyone was busy preparing and happy." "Oh, but I do believe this merits further discussion," Miss Marple replied gently. "What if it's a matter of significance? Secrets can lurk in the shadows of a festive day." As she left the children with enough food for thought, they glanced uneasily at one another, their wide eyes reflecting a shared concern. Miss Marple's mind was racing too, stitching together all the fragmented threads of conversation. Later, Miss Marple found herself at the churchyard, sheltered from the drizzle by a far crooked tree. The tranquil gravestones stood solemnly, and she traced her fingers over the weather-beaten inscriptions, half listening to the distant sounds of celebration from the fete. Each name beckoned to her to recall the tales they enshrined, tales filled with loss, love, and resentment. There was something in the air, thickening with the promise of revelation. It was then she heard a voice, drifting from behind a nearby headstone. "You can't take it with you, Edward. Remember that." Miss Marple froze, her heart quickening. The voice crackled with tension, a curt warning intertwined with a familiarity she couldn't quite place. She stepped carefully closer, hiding behind the shadows, craning her neck to catch a glimpse. "I did not ask for your judgment, Sarah," came the sharp response in Edward Langston's unmistakable smooth tone. "I came here to reclaim what's rightfully mine." Miss Marple's brow furrowed as she noted the figure of a woman, tall, with auburn hair, standing imperiously over him, a smattering of determination in her posture. An undeniable connection sparked. "Sarah, from the vicarage staff," Miss Marple deduced, her memory recalling hurried conversations about her strong opinionation over the estate and the legacy of Lady Cressida. "Yours or not, you must tread carefully. People are watching," Sarah hissed, her voice heavy with caution. "The estate holds remnants of an angry past, and whatever you're looking for, it will lead you to trouble." Miss Marple stepped back, quiet as a whisper, her mind churning. Sarah's warning, despite its veiled undertones, carried a weight of wisdom. What exactly was Edward after? What stake did he, or perhaps they, hold in Lady Cressida's estate? A commotion erupted from the village, laughter spilling over from the fete as Miss Marple turned back toward the festivities. Yet a sinister thrill shot through her. At that moment, the pieces began to shift more profoundly, unraveling clearer than she had hoped. Edward's importance in this web grew combined with Sarah's unyielding resolve. Just as she began to retreat, a chill ran down her spine. There, abandoned momentarily among the stones, a crumpled letter, its edges worn and ink smudged, caught her eye. It bore an unmistakable mark, a crest she recognized, Lady Cressida's family emblem. With the stakes now impossibly higher, Miss Marple's heart raced. What secrets lay within the ink of this letter? The answers to the whispers in the dark were nearing the light. Clutching the letter tightly, she turned on her heel, her determination blooming within. Some mysteries intertwined themselves deeper as she ventured forward into the night's tales, yet untold. The afternoon sun dashed through the clouds only to be quickly enveloped again, casting a pall over the village of St. Mary Mead that felt oddly fitting. The faint echoes of laughter and chatter from the fete still lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the troubled atmosphere now thick with unease. Miss Marple's heart raced as she walked towards the vicarage, her thoughts swirling around the events of the night before. The whispers, the secrets, and now Edward Langston's cryptic utterings gnawed at her mind like the relentless rain that had just begun again, drumming softly against the cobblestones. As she approached the vicarage, the door flew open. Standing there, pale and wide-eyed, was Dolly Murdoch, her usual sprightliness drained away. "Miss Marple," she exclaimed, stepping aside with a frantic wave, "you must come in at once. Reverend Featherstone, he's... Dolly, dear, slow down," Miss Marple urged, though her voice offered little comfort against the shrill winds of concern. "What's happened to the Reverend?" With trembling hands, Dolly clutched the doorframe. "He's dead. In his study, locked from the inside. I don't understand how. It's like he vanished. And yet, there he is." It took mere moments for Miss Marple to enter the vicarage, her senses on high alert. The palpable tension choked the air, weaving through the corridors like an unwelcome spirit. She had always found solace in the quaint familiarity of the vicarage with its many nooks and bookshelves. Now, it felt foreign and sinister. Inside the study, the sight of Reverend Featherstone's lifeless form brought a chill to her spine. He was sprawled across his desk, papers scattered around him like an abandoned shipwreck on a stormy sea. The door was indeed locked, and the window, too, was barred. A perfect murder, she mused, as she examined the scene with the keen eye of a hawk. "Who found him?" she inquired, her voice steady as she stepped forward to inspect the body. "I did. I went to deliver tea and check on him, as I always do in the afternoons," Dolly whimpered, her distress unveiling the cracks in her composure. "But when I knocked, there was no answer, so I tried the knob, and it was locked," Miss Marple interjected. "And when you called for help?" "I ran to fetch Constable Matthews, of course," Dolly added, her voice regaining some strength. "And he managed to force the door open, but it was too late." Certainly too late. Miss Marple's gaze fell upon Reverend Featherstone's hand, slightly curled. A slip of paper protruded from beneath his fingers, drenched in ink and smeared, but not beyond recognition. When she carefully pried it free, her heartbeat quickened. It bore the mark of Lady Cressida's emblem, like the letter she had found in the churchyard. "What does it say, Miss Marple?" Dolly asked, peering over curiously. "It isn't clear yet," Miss Marple murmured, her brows knitting together as she deciphered the few legible words. Something about debts, a meeting, soon. It appears Reverend Featherstone had been involved in matters far more complex than mere parish affairs. As Constable Matthews arrived, his heavy boots thudding against the wooden floors, Miss Marple listed the signs that pointed toward murder. Reverend Featherstone did not seem to have enemies, but the world has a tendency to hide them beneath plain facades. We must discover who stood to benefit from his demise. Matthews leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "It'll take more than your intellect to untangle this, Miss Marple. The Reverend wasn't set to inherit anything, nor did he fall into trouble with money. Not that I know of, at least. The villagers have been loyal to him as far as I can recollect." "Loyalty can be a double-edged sword, Constable," she replied softly, feeling the weight of the letter in her palm. "Yet I believe this reveals the shadow of something deeper." Time seemed suspended in the vicarage as they exchanged theories, the shadows flickering at the edges of the room. With each moment, Miss Marple observed. It was the little nuances that spoke volumes. Matthews unconsciously wrung his cap. Something deep in his demeanor hinted at uncertainty. Who else was in this house yesterday? The fate drew quite the crowd, didn't it? Miss Marple's voice sliced through the heavy silence. The parishioners, yes. Matthews nodded slowly, remembering. But Edward Langston was here, and Sarah too. They had come to discuss matters regarding Lady Cressida's estate. Ah, Edward Langston. His name lingered in the back of her mind, surging to the forefront with renewed intensity. And Sarah? What did she say? I remember her being particularly vocal about... Before she could finish, the constable cut her off. I spoke with her. She seems distraught, claiming she hadn't seen anything amiss. But I did notice her look pale when I mentioned you were here. Miss Marple relished this insight. Curious how she'd react. She murmured, mentally untangling the threads that connected the Reverend's death to Edward and Sarah. Dark motives had a way of weaving themselves into those we trusted the most. Where is she now? She asked urgently. Outside, talking to the other villagers. They're in quite a tiz. What with the fate, and now this. She may have more to say. Just as Miss Marple turned to leave the study, a glint caught her eye. A photograph half hidden beneath a stack of envelopes flickered with relevance. As she drew it closer, her breath briefly caught in her throat. The image depicted Reverend Featherstone standing beside Lady Cressida. Their expressions were warm, yet something beneath the surface curled darkly. Who had taken the photograph? There's something else at play here, Constable, she remarked, slipping the smudged letter and the photograph into her pocket. I fear this might lead us to a clandestine web of secrets. The night waits for no one, not even in death. As she hurried from the vicarage, Miss Marple felt the storm brewing not just in the skies above, but also within the very heart of the village. The promised fate had given way to a festering uncertainty, and the mind that once held the keys to the past now lay lifeless. With each step, the urgency mounted, a secretive game unfurling with tension. Somewhere, someone knew the truth, and Miss Marple was determined to pry it from the shadows, one way or another. Chapter 4. The Buttery Clue. The kitchen of the vicarage, normally a haven of warmth, felt eerily cold that rainy afternoon. Miss Marple stood at the threshold, the fragrant steam from freshly baked bread habitually wafting through the air, now shadowed by an unsettling chill. The kitchen was juxtaposed with the sinister stillness of the adjacent study where the body of Reverend Featherstone lay. A memory of laughter and light now felt like a distant dream. Dolly mentioned that he was last seen here, in this very room, Miss Marple muttered under her breath, stepping inside. The faint patter of raindrops against the window echoed like whispers, each drop resonating with the unanswered questions that plagued her mind. She quickly surveyed the room, noting the well-worn cutting board and the jars of preserves that sat like sentinels on the shelves. A place of life, now tinged with shadow, she mused, running her fingers along the countertop, tracing the grey flour dust like an anxious artist's brush. As her gaze swept across the room, something caught her eye, an ornate wooden box atop the pantry shelf, partially obscured by a dusty lace tablecloth. She approached it cautiously, her instincts peaking. It struck her as strangely out of place amid the mundane kitchen utensils. Every object has a purpose. Perhaps not every purpose is innocent. With a creak of the shelf, she pulled the box open, its hinges protesting the rust of neglect. Inside, folded papers lay nestled like long-forgotten secrets. She held them delicately, each crisp crease bringing forth the scent of ink and perhaps past grievances. As she delved through the papers, a dark green envelope slipped from the others, its seal emblematic of Lady Cressida's family crest. The rain began to pound harder against the windows, a symphony of chaos resonating with her thoughts. Unfolding the envelope, Miss Marple couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to unearth something of grave significance. Inside lay a letter, worn but legible. Lines of elegant handwriting sprawled across the page, revealing details of debts unpaid, conversations held in hushed tones, and intriguing mentions of clandestine meetings scheduled under the guise of darkness. "Interesting indeed," she breathed, piecing together the fragments. It spoke of clandestine dealings, secret pacts involving not just the Reverend, but also those who had been close to Lady Cressida's estate. A name leaped out, stinging her consciousness: Edward Langston. What could he possibly want that demanded words like these to be exchanged? She turned the page over and over, scanning for any familiar patterns in the handwriting, but the ink remained stubbornly mute, refusing to reveal its author's emotional pulse. Suddenly, the back door swung open with a flourish, and in walked Sarah, her auburn hair damp from the rain. Startled, Miss Marple quickly shoved the letter back into its envelope, her heart racing. The unease, etched across Sarah's face, told the story before words could find their way. "Miss Marple," she exclaimed, her voice a tight wire of tension, "what are you doing here? You shouldn't be alone. Not now. The village is in upheaval." Miss Marple maintained her composure, tucking the letter cautiously into her pocket. "Oh, just a little investigation, dear Sarah. A kitchen is a good place to look for secrets. Wouldn't you agree? After all, meals and memories are often intertwined." "What secrets?" Sarah interrupted, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You mustn't poke around. People might just find that you know too much for your own good." "Am I to live in fear of knowledge?" Miss Marple responded lightly, though her eyes bore into Sarah's with keen awareness. "Knowledge can often illuminate the dark corners where shadows lurk. The Reverend's passing has brought questions to light, and you should know more than most, given your position here." Sarah pressed her lips together, conflict swirling in her eyes. He was a good man. Very few understood the burdens he carried. Sometimes secrets are best when kept hidden. "Perhaps," Miss Marple replied thoughtfully, folding her hands. "And yet it seems that there are layers to this ice, and it is beginning to crack. What was it that the Reverend knew, Sarah? What debts were discussed?" But before Sarah could answer, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the corridor. Minutes later, Constable Matthews appeared in the doorway, his brow knitted with concern. "Miss Marple, I came looking for you. It seems the villagers are stirring. There's talk of Reverend Featherstone's death being whispered among neighbors, and fears are blooming like wildflowers." "Rightly so, I would surmise," Miss Marple replied, casting a knowing glance towards Sarah. "The vicar had quite the network of connections, and I dare say some unspoken tension hangs in the air." "Oh," Matthews raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "And you've unearthed something of interest while I'm bursting in here. Go on then, enlighten me." Miss Marple hesitated, sharing a glance with Sarah, gauging the risk of revealing too much. "There appears to be more at stake here than mere pastoral duties. It's a matter of debts and gatherings of individuals who dwelt in the vicar's confidence. The likes of Edward Langston's name has appeared here." At the mention of Edward's name, Matthews shifted uneasily. "He certainly has a reputation for entanglements, but why would he be involved with the vicar's affairs?" A good question, Miss Marple said, her voice regaining its calm, collected tone. Perhaps it would be prudent to search his quarters for anything that might lend us insight. The tension pulsing through her intensified. Misdirection lingered, as Sarah's gaze darted nervously between the two. "Listen," Matthews began, but then hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "I wouldn't be surprised if he were privy to something that led to trouble. It makes sense, an ill-fated entwining of old feuds. Then it's settled. We must press forward, but with caution," Miss Marple concluded, determination glinting in her eyes. "One thing is clear. The Reverend's death is just the beginning. Lady Cressida's legacy may be a sprawling vine of secrets and lies. We must uncoil it one loop at a time." Sarah cast a furtive glance at Miss Marple, laced with a mixture of concern and trepidation. "Just be careful, will you? Sometimes knowledge blesses, yet sometimes it burns." As the rain beat relentlessly upon the roof, Miss Marple felt the weight of an unseen truth lurking in the shadows, waiting to be discovered. And it wouldn't be long until one of them stumbled upon the fiery embers hidden beneath the ashes. With the prospect of a deeper plunge into this mystery, shimmering like raindrops catching the light, she could only hope that the path would lead to answers rather than demise. But as she glanced out into the rain-soaked village beyond the vicarage, she couldn't shake the conviction that the soft whispers of the past would soon collide explosively with the present. Indeed, in the kitchen of the vicarage rested a clue poised to change everything. Chapter 5: The Missing Will. The rain fell with a relentless fury, drenching the cobblestone streets of St. Mary Mead in a sheet of shimmering reflections. Miss Marple, her sensible umbrella barely providing adequate shelter, navigated the winding path toward the vicarage of Reverend Featherstone, her mind awash with thoughts of the tangled web of relationships that now surrounded the late clergyman's estate. Whispers of a contested will had begun to circulate, like storm clouds ready to burst into an uproar. Approaching the door, she paused, glancing up at the leaded glass windows of the kitchen, where the light flickered warmly against the stormy backdrop. It felt strange to think that behind such familiar walls lay not just fond memories and warm meals, but now an undercurrent of turmoil threatening to undermine everything. The faintest memory of laughter echoed in her ears, replaced by the grim reality of loss and ambiguity. "Miss Marple," a voice called, interrupting her reverie. It was Sarah, drenched and breathless, having rushed to find her. "You shouldn't wander out here alone. Nothing good can come from it." Miss Marple smiled gently, her mind racing with the implications of Sarah's sudden arrival. "Oh, my dear Sarah, I was just contemplating the vicarage. Tell me, have you heard the latest about the will? The villagers seem convinced there's something quite scandalous afoot." Sarah shifted nervously, her auburn hair clinging damply to her forehead. "Rumors, Miss Marple. You know how they weave tales, often more striking than the facts. But—" She hesitated, her gaze darting toward the kitchen door, where the air hummed with an anxious energy. "Tell me," Miss Marple urged, stepping inside and flicking off her wet umbrella, her heart racing with anticipation. The warmth of the kitchen enveloped her, but even that felt tainted by tension. "The will. It's supposed to be rather generous," Sarah said, wringing her hands. "Much would go to Lady Cressida's charity, but there are those who stand to lose their entire livelihoods, Edward Langston among them." "Ah, Edward," Miss Marple mused. "The name crops up like clockwork in this unraveling story. What exactly did he expect in this messy affair with the will?" "The vicar proposed to help Edward out of a terrible debt," Sarah revealed, a faint blush creeping to her cheeks. He had a sordid business, and the Reverend often acted as his confidant. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, the pieces of the puzzle starting to slot into place. And what of the rest? Surely there are others who might feel aggrieved. The lady's estate would have drawn a fair bit of attention. Sarah bit her lip, her eyes glistening with apprehension. There are whispers. Some say that others felt they had a claim to the estate. Old friends of Lady Cressida's, who might have provided for their families, had things gone differently. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden clatter from the adjoining room. Both women exchanged alarmed glances before Miss Marple moved quickly toward the sound, her intuition screaming that a confrontation of sorts was at hand. The door swung open, revealing Constable Matthews, his coat dripping from the rain, flanked by a noticeably pale-faced Edward Langston. His presence darkened the warm atmosphere, adding an undercurrent of tension that clashed with the homey scents of baking bread and spiced stews. "Ah, Miss Marple," Matthews greeted, his brow furrowing further as he regarded Edward with a wary glance. "Seems we have a visitor. Edward here insists on discussing the affairs of Reverend Featherstone, but I suspect his motives aren't as clear-cut." "A rather deeply rooted distrust, wouldn't you say?" Miss Marple remarked, meeting Edward's hardened expression with her own calm resolve. "What have you to say for yourself, Mr. Langston?" "I seek only to protect those whose lives are entwined with my own," Edward replied, his voice low yet fervent. "The talk of the will people misunderstand my ties to the Reverend? I had nothing but respect for him. Surely you cannot blame me for wishing for some say in how this all unfolds." "Indeed," Miss Marple replied, arching an eyebrow, intrigued by the overtones of desperation lacing his words. "But tell me, what do you know of the contents of that will? I suspect there are more players at hand than merely words spoken in hidden corners." "I know nothing," Edward retorted too swiftly, a hint of anxiety flickering in his eyes. "Only that it was meant to safeguard the village. Any suggestion otherwise is purely speculation." Miss Marple studied him carefully, observing the tension underlying his bravado. Then she turned to Sarah, who stood frozen, eyes wide with fear. "Perhaps we should gather those closest to the vicar, his longtime friends, and seek the truth in their own words. Each may shed light upon the shadows lurking around the vicar's affairs." A shudder passed through the kitchen as she envisaged the panorama of emotions that would surface regarding Lady Cressida's estate, a world woven with the tension of love, envy, and loss. As they congregated within the confines of the vicarage, the air thickened with unspoken grievances, the truth masked beneath layers of politeness. Minutes later, they had a small circle gathered. Miss Marple took a deep breath, her eyes scanning each individual, a potpourri of vested interests, longing gazes, and jittery fingers. The first to speak was Dolly, the vicar's loyal housekeeper, her voice trembling. "He spoke of a change to come," she began, her eyes darting as though the walls themselves had ears. "Something about a charity and some debtors he was helping, but details were murky." Next was Agnes, the vicar's longtime parishioner. "He kept things close to his chest," she blurted, her fingers clutching her pearl necklace. "Too much charity tends to cloud judgment, if you catch my drift. And not everyone benefited." As each spoke, Miss Marple pieced together a brilliant mosaic of shared histories, finding links with Edward's ever-present shadow lingering over the estate. The urgency mounting within her expressed itself, prompting her to explore deeper into the matter. But could the vicar ever be accused of wrongdoing? Matthews ventured cautiously, shifting uncomfortably as glances shot around the room. He seemed a good man, above reproach. Perhaps too good, Miss Marple murmured, her eyes landing firmly on Edward Langston. Each sentiment here may not bear the truth of it all, but surely there lies a clue amidst this trepidation. But before she could guide the discussion further, a loud knock interrupted their spell. The door swung wide, and the torrential wind howled inside, carrying with it a man of firm stature, Master Robert Cressida, Lady Cressida's nephew. His expression was equal parts determination and fury. "Where is it?" he demanded, the palpable air thick with his presence. "What have you done to the will?" Miss Marple's heart raced as recognition struck her. The stakes had suddenly risen, her intuition now screaming that they were on the cusp of unraveling the fabric of deceit that enveloped this entire ordeal. The missing will, a treasure sought by many and harbored by few, was about to reveal its true weight. The tension electrified the air as she stood, her thoughts whirring. If only she could break down the barriers of desperation and envy that lingered so closely. She sensed that the truth would soon present itself, even if wrapped in the absurdity of their very society's greed. This would lead her somewhere, perhaps even to the final piece of the puzzle. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her breath steadying, bracing for the storm of revelations ahead. As Master Robert's gaze locked with hers, Miss Marple's mind raced with possibilities. This confrontation could very well change everything. In that charged moment, her instincts fired anew. The game was afoot, and the answer lay hidden, waiting for its moment to step into the light. Chapter 6. Shadows of the Past. The shadows in the vicarage deepened as evening approached, clouds colliding ominously in the leaden sky, squeezing out the last remnants of daylight. Miss Marple's thoughts swirled with the revelations of the day, each one like a raindrop splashing against the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead, rippling outwards into the murky depths of history and intrigue. The tension in the kitchen still hummed after Master Robert Cressida's fiery entrance, leaving a trail of dread lingering in the air. As the storm raged outside, Miss Marple felt an almost palpable pull towards the past. The night of darkness, once vibrant with secret laughter, now looked like a battlefield littered with emotional detritus. With the will still unaccounted for, Miss Marple resolved to dig deeper. Her instincts told her that Reverend Featherstone's death was tied to a chain of events that stretched far beyond today's disputes. She had a mind like a web, spinning and weaving narratives until the truth stood, stark and undeniable, in the center. "Miss Marple, are we to expect more visitors?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with anxiety as she watched the raindrops race down the window panes. "I dare say," Miss Marple replied, absently finishing off her cup of tea, her gaze directed toward the kitchen door. "It has struck me that the Reverend's past lingers almost as heavily as this storm. We must unearth what lies beneath those placid surfaces." She lifted her gaze, the thoughtful glimmer in her eyes sending a shiver of anticipation through Sarah. "There is an old saying about shadows. They reveal the truth. We simply must know where to cast our light." Moments later, Constable Matthews returned, shaking off rain-drenched garments like a wet hound. His expression was troubled, eyes dark with concern. "Miss Marple, I'm afraid the storm has wrought unforeseen mischief. A rumor has surfaced, a reminder from years long past, involving the Featherstone family and the Cressida estate. They were intertwined in ways that some would rather forget. Ah, Miss Marple said, leaning forward, her intuition stirring. What kind of entanglement? Matthews hesitated. A court case that pitted Lady Cressida against the late Reverend's family over a disputed trust. The village had not forgotten, though some prefer to let sleeping dogs lie. But it's been said that the old family mansion, Haverston Manor, holds secrets, ones that could tip the balance on the affairs of today. Miss Marple felt the excitement coursing through her. Then I suppose that must be our next destination. The past, whoever tries to conceal it, often reveals their most potent truths. With that, the two women set out into the rain, the wind whipping their coats around them like restless spirits. Haverston Manor loomed ahead, its skeletal silhouette barely defined against the swirling mists. The village had spoken of its malevolence, of laughter trapped in ancient walls, dimly echoed through the years. The mansion stood as a relic, both magnificent and ghostly, holding its secrets tightly within its embrace. They approached the heavy oak door, worn with the touch of time, hesitating before entering. Inside, the air felt thick with history, laden with whispers that echoed in the high ceilings. Dust motes danced lazily through a singular beam of light, illuminating the vastness of the foyer, while shadows lingered in every corner. As they cautiously wandered through the cavernous rooms adorned with heavy drapes and dark wood, Miss Marple kept her eyes peeled for signs of life, clues that would validate the rumors that buzzed around the estate. She led the way into a small study, its oak desk cluttered with papers that spoke of transactions, letters that might hold keys to revelations. "Miss Marple, look here," Sarah exclaimed, rummaging through a faded drawer. She produced an old ledger, the pages yellowed with age and filled with elegant, flowing script. Miss Marple leaned closer to examine it, her mind racing. These are records of the estate, debts, loans, even correspondence with Reverend Featherstone. Look here, a loan made to him in the year of Lady Cressida's death. Her heart quickened as she traced her fingers over the elegant yet spidery handwriting, a delicate filigree that seemed connected to the same family she was perilously entangled with now. "Do you see this, Sarah? William Featherstone. This could be the connection we need. The estate he borrowed from, and who else signed? There's a name." Sarah's voice wavered, but the ink is blurred by time. Miss Marple turned the page, the urgency growing in her chest. "If I'm not mistaken, this note appears to reference a hidden agreement, a trust formed for Lady Cressida's charity, one that may have been more about blackmail than benevolence." She leaned back, her mind sharper than ever. The wheeze of the weather outside seemed a mere echo against the thundering heartbeat of a growing mystery. Before she could articulate her next thought, a soft scuffle sounded behind them. Startled, they turned to find none other than Edward Langston, lurking in the doorway, his pallor ghostly against the backdrop. "Eavesdropping now, Mr. Langston?" Miss Marple remarked coolly, though she sensed a change in him. Recognition flickered in his eyes, a spark of fear, or perhaps regret, as he stepped over the threshold into the knowledge of the living. "I had my reasons," he replied quietly, "but I didn't suspect you'd find it here. That ledger, it's not meant to uncover." "Ah, but uncover it we shall. The past is rarely as dead as we hope," she challenged him, holding his gaze steady. "Tell me about that trust, Edward, and what further connections this estate could have to your debts." His resolve faltered visibly. "You know nothing of what happened between our families all those years ago. Everything points to ruin for those who dig too deep." Miss Marple felt the electric charge in the room. strengthened by their collective resolve, growing with the thunder outside. What intrigues me, Mr. Langston, is that your actions scream contrition. I suspect you, too, have unearthed even more than you desire to tell. The rain fell heavily against the windows, the sound imbued with a sense of urgency and foreboding. As tension thickened, Miss Marple's instincts screamed that they were close, a revelation pulsating through the air like static before a storm. "Meet me here tomorrow, in the light of day," she instructed him, her voice steady. "For under these shadows of the past, the truth waits to be unearthed." As Edward retreated, Sarah looked up at Miss Marple, admiration shimmering in her eyes. "You sensed it, didn't you? We're on the brink of something monumental, aren't we?" Eyes glinting, Miss Marple nodded. "Indeed. And should the clouds break, perhaps the treasures hidden in that ledger will illuminate the shadows that cloak this village, finally illuminating the threads of innocence and guilt intertwined." And as the storm continued to rage through the night, so too did the storm of revelations brew within Haverston Manor, promising to unleash upon the unsuspecting villagers the horrors and truths long buried. With instinct guiding her, Miss Marple felt the breath of fate echoing softly among the echoes of yesterday, ready to unveil itself. Chapter 7. Fractured Alibis. The following morning, the rain had dulled to a gentle drizzle, casting a silver sheen over the idyllic village of St. Mary Mead. Yet beneath its quaint facade, a profound turmoil churned, for Miss Marple had spent the night piecing together the frayed threads of speculation and deceit surrounding the Reverend Featherstone's untimely demise. The air felt heavy with unspoken truths, and she sensed that it was time to confront the earlier suspects in the dim light of day, where shadows of their alibis could be more easily cast aside. Pulling her coat tightly around her against the chill, Miss Marple gathered her notes and made her way toward the village hall, where she would assemble all those tangled in the web of suspicion. Constable Matthews stood by the entrance, eyes darting through the early morning fog with an earnest expression that carried a hint of worry. "Miss Marple," he said, barely concealing his apprehension, "are you sure it's wise to gather everyone like this?" Miss Marple smiled warmly, her demeanor steady despite the weight of the inquiry looming ahead. "Constable, the truth often reveals itself like a timid creature. It shyly flees from the shadows until the light boldly breaks through. I intend to shine that light today." The hall itself was a quaint structure, its walls layered with the echoes of past meetings and the whispers of discontent. One by one, they filed in. Master Robert Cressida came first, his brow furrowed with frustration, a paper clenched tightly in hand, followed closely by Edward Langston, whose pallor seemed even more pronounced this morning. He shifted uneasily, a man on the cusp of confession, yet afraid of the depth of his own words. Sarah, Miss Marple's diligent companion, settled into a chair at the back, eyes wide and observant. As the room filled with an electric tension, Miss Marple rose, her gaze sweeping across the group. "Thank you all for coming. The events surrounding Reverend Featherstone's death have unearthed profound concerns regarding our tightly knit community." She paused, letting the gravity of her words settle. "And I believe it is best that we discuss a timeline of events leading up to his demise." "Surely you can't suspect any of us," Robert interjected, his voice laced with indignation. "A good man slaughtered amidst our midst. A pox upon us all." "Not suspicion, dear Robert," she countered softly, "but inquiry. Clarity is required. Now, if we may begin." Reluctantly, they began recounting their whereabouts on the night of Reverend Featherstone's death. each alibi unfolded like petals of a wilting flower. Master Robert claimed he had been in the company of Lady Cressida, recounting an excursion through their vast estate until 10 o'clock. Edward meticulously recounted his evening with the Reverend, discreetly omitting the heated exchange regarding the missing will. Lastly, there was a whispered confession from Sarah, who revealed her late-night patterns of trawling the gardens for herbs, providing a seemingly innocuous release of nervous energy. But as Miss Marple listened, her keen intuition pricked at her consciousness. "Forgive me," she interrupted gently, "but I must ask you all again. Who left Haveston Manor after dinner the evening the Reverend passed?" "A dreadful evening for the whole village," Robert replied, his bravado faltering. "But no one left Haveston that night, I assure you." Quietly, Miss Marple observed the trembling tension that threaded between each individual, masking insecurities and fears beneath layers of pride. The wheel of suspicion turned within her, reminding her of the ledger found the prior evening and its cryptic promise of hidden agreements. "My dear friends, it seems that each of your recollections has the distinct markings of causality, but lacks the warmth of truth." At those words, the room's atmosphere thickened, like the storm clouds of the previous night. "What do you mean by that?" Edward cut in sharply, a flash of panic in his eyes as he recognized the shift in tone. "Let us consider the time of the fateful meeting at the manor. Was the Reverend not to inform you all of the present arrangement concerning this alleged will?" She pressed on, her gaze pinning them down. Robert began, before falling silent under the sharpness of her look. "Ah, yes. Who knew indeed?" Miss Marple mused, her mind spinning calculations. "You, Master Cressida, learned about the arrangement only the day before his death, did you not? You were furious about that will." Silence fell thickly. The tension became a living thing, tangible, wrapping around them tightly. "What of you, Edward? You mentioned your connection with the Reverend, and yet skirt around the notion of your tempering discourse." He flinched, and Miss Marple seized her chance. "You've placed yourself at the scene without truly revealing your motive or whereabouts. Might desperation coax you to conceal a confrontation with the Reverend?" "I had business with him, yes." Edward's voice rose defensively. "But I would never—" "But you remained after Robert left, didn't you?" She overshot him, a light lighting in her eyes at the swelling realization. "The letter left by the press. No witnesses to reveal the truth. You were the one who left in haste. And what was that heated discourse about? The will?" "Enough!" Robert shouted, his patience evaporating. "This delusion that we're all guilty is absurdity." "Perhaps, Master Cressida, yet absurdity spins now in this room more tightly than truth." Miss Marple shed a glance at Sarah, whose fingers nervously toyed with a thread from her dress. "None of us wished him harm, Miss Marple." Robert's voice softened, yet the thin veneer of calm revealed his frayed edges. "Best we delete this charade before—" A muffled voice chimed in from the doorway as Lady Cressida entered, her face a mask of shock. "I must speak about what I overheard last night." The room went devoid of sound as all eyes turned toward her, palpable intrigue electrifying the air. As Lady Cressida stepped tentatively but purposefully forward, the secrets that pressed upon them felt ever closer to explosion. The enormity of confession rippled in the charged atmosphere surrounding them, and Miss Marple, with a deep intensity in her eyes, could not help but grin at the path illuminated before her. "Perhaps the time has come to peel back yet another layer of this multi-layered intrigue," she murmured, the revelatory nature of the moment stirring excitement within her. And as Lady Cressida prepared to reveal what she had witnessed, Miss Marple grasped the threads of truth, still hidden in the layers of fractured alibis. She could sense they were nearing a precipice, the chilling winds of deception swirling closer to the revelations yet to unfold. Chapter 8. The Vanishing Visitor. The cool morning air hung thick with anticipation as the drizzle turned to a sharp rainfall, tapping insistently on the windows of Haverston Manor. Miss Marple stood by the large parlour window, her fingers tracing the outline of the ledgers they had yet to unravel, each entry a whisper from the past that might hold the key to the troubling events surrounding the Reverend Featherstone's demise. The startled murmur from the group in the village hall echoed in her ears, drawing her mind back to the present. There was something truly unsettling brewing beneath the surface, a truth lurking like a spectre in the shadows. "Are you going to let her speak, Miss Marple?" Sarah whispered, breaking into Miss Marple's reverie. Her large eyes darted between Lady Cressida and the collected group, anxiety mingling with hope. Lady Cressida was poised at the doorway, her expression clouded in thought, as if waiting for the right moment to unveil a tender secret. "Overheard something crucial last night," she began, her voice trembling slightly as it cut through the suspense-laden air. "While I was in the garden looking for herbs—" "Herbs?" Robert Cressida interrupted, curling his lip in distaste. "At this time of year?" A habit of mine," Lady Cressida stammered, her resolve flickering. "But I heard someone speaking in the manor, a fierce argument between Edward and Reverend Featherstone about money. I was nearly caught, and then the call of some manner of visitor drew me quietly away." Her eyes darted nervously to Edward, who had grown unusually pale. "A visitor?" Miss Marple echoed, her brows furrowing in thought. "What sort of visitor? Did you see this person?" Before Lady Cressida could answer, a sudden noise from outside, the sharp crunch of footsteps breaking the fragile silence in the yard, interrupted the moment. Bitten by cold curiosity, Miss Marple turned to the window. Her heart raced as she spotted a figure, the silhouette of a man, a stranger, standing resolutely beneath the oak tree as if waiting for something or someone. "Who is that?" Robert's voice came, laced with uncertainty that seeped into the atmosphere. Miss Marple's breath quickened as she peered closely at the enigmatic figure. Her instincts urged her to take action. As Lady Cressida continued explaining the visitor she had spotted, Miss Marple's attention was consumed by the stranger. There was something strikingly familiar about the man, yet she couldn't quite place it. The fleeting shape seemed to shift ever so slightly as the rain fell steadily, painting him in a haze of indistinguishable colors. With a sudden determination, Miss Marple lifted her skirts and moved toward the door. "Excuse me," she said softly, urgency rising within her. "I must see who this person is." "Miss Marple, you shouldn't," Robert cautioned, but she was already embarking down the damp path, her thoughts racing. The air thickened around her with an electric tang, the whole world seeming to hold its breath. As she reached the threshold, the coarse wind whistled about her, almost echoing with foreboding. She stepped carefully, glancing back momentarily at the gathering in the hall, their faces grim-lit with concern as they watched her venture outside toward the figure. "Hello," she called, her cautious voice rising over the whispers of the rain. The stranger shifted slightly, his features obscured by the shadows cast from the branches above and the sheets of rain cascading down. "Madam," he replied, his voice low and steady, almost melodic. "I believe I am looking for Miss Marple." Feeling a shiver of intrigue reactor in her chest, she continued to approach. "Who might you be?" "I am a friend," he replied, tilting his head as if assessing her. Edward Langston sent me. At the mention of Edward's name, a mixture of unease and curiosity established its hold on her. What would Mr. Langston want with me, pray? She pressed on, every ounce of her careful observation focused on him. Urgency, the stranger said succinctly before glancing over his shoulder nervously, as if he were not entirely comfortable being out in the storm. We have much to discuss, much that the others ought not to overhear. But I cannot linger long. I fear— He stopped suddenly, expressions storming across his features as if weighing a pivotal decision. Miss Marple noticed the quick flickers in his gaze, the tension in his brow. Fear? Why fear? She pressed, her heart hammering steadily. Just unprepared. I need assurance that you would understand. He pivoted slightly, revealing hints of a nervous disposition. If I desire to share what I know, I must trust that you will listen well. I assure you, I am a confidant to many secrets in this village, Miss Marple said firmly, attempting to bind the chasm of distrust. As if compelled by a hidden thread, she gestured toward the safety of the manor, hoping to draw him in from the raging elements. Come, inside. Yet just as she made her invitation, the stranger caught a movement in the periphery before their deepening conversation could commence. His eyes widened, darting from her to the path that wound toward the village. No, it cannot be, he muttered beneath his breath. Sir, she urged, what navigates you in such haste? You must listen to me, he blurted, desperation coating his tone. In that moment, without a second thought, as if he were a shadow coalescing with the clouded rain, he turned and sprinted off into the downpour. Wait, Miss Marple cried, her voice swallowed by the fierce winds as he vanished into the relentless sheets of rain, leaving nothing but the sound of the crashing storm behind him. Heart racing and an unsettling trepidation gripping her heart, she stood at the threshold. What had just transpired? The peculiar stranger was gone, slipped through the fingers of fate, like so many secrets held close in the folds of existence. As droplets streamed over her face, mingling with the disbelief swimming within her, she felt urgency swell in her chest. Edward Langston's shadow loomed large, and not only had a potential witness evaded her grasp, but the threads of mystery became even more tangled in the wake of this vanishing visitor. With determined clarity, she turned back toward the hall, the clamor of voices echoing in her ears. The last fragments of insight beckoned in the depths of her mind, threatening to unveil something significant in the intricacies of the betrayal and the sins of years long past. How could this visitor entwine with the fabric of the murder mystery, and what dark shadows clung to the implications of his hurried departure? As she stepped back inside, damp but resolute, the pieces of this growing puzzle were revealing themselves, ready to culminate at the next decisive moment. Each heartbeat echoed the pulse of a burgeoning truth, begging to be uncovered, while she welcomed the challenge awaiting her within the walls of Haverston Manor. The turn of events had escalated, the tether of fate interwoven more tightly than ever, and she knew that the discovery would lead her closer to unraveling the deadly web obscured within dim echoes of the past. Amidst the relentless downpour, the vicarage stood shrouded in silence, an unsettling stillness surrounding it, like the fog of uncertainty that hung over Miss Marple's mind. The evening promised a storm, not just of nature, but of emotions, ready to erupt as the characters ensnared within the web of mystery gathered for what she had dubbed a final convening. As the candles flickered against the damp, creaky walls, The oppressive tension inside the room felt palpable. It nipped at her heels like the brisk rain outside. Miss Marple had taken care to prepare the atmosphere, knowing full well the combustible mix of guilt, fear, and desperation that lingered in the wake of the Reverend Featherstone's untimely demise. Suspects sat around the parlor as if cornered, each one a piece of a puzzle she yearned to solve. The air was thick, every breath heavy with unspoken accusations. Sarah was perched nervously on the edge of a chair, her fingers still toying with the thread of her dress, leaning forward with heightened anticipation. Lady Cressida entered next, her face pale and her eyes wide. It was as if she too understood the stakes now. "Sorry for being late," Edward Langston announced, bursting into the room, water-drenched and agitated, shaking off droplets like a dog. He trailed off, his gaze flicking uneasily from Lady Cressida to Robert Cressida, who stared back, arms crossed, defiantly, as if daring him to explain himself. "Do sit down, Mr. Langston," Miss Marple said, softly, her calm demeanor providing a stark contrast to the tempest outside. As he took his place, a flicker of anxiety crossed her thoughts. There was something different about Edward tonight, a palpable sense of dread that made her heart pound like the rain against the window. "Thank you for coming." Miss Marple's voice steadied the assembled group, her piercing eyes surveying each person. "I felt it necessary to gather you all after our harrowing last discussions. The Reverend's death has left more questions than answers." Her gaze lingered on Edward, and she felt the tension therein. "The truth, Miss Marple, is that we are not all destined for guilt," Robert interjected, the edge of resentment flaring in his voice. "Some of us have families, legacy." His words betrayed the sanctity of the paternal bond he so desperately wished to protect, suggesting more than familial loyalty, hinting at deeper motives. "Indeed," Miss Marple acknowledged with a focused nod. "Yet, secrets can often weave tighter bonds than relationships do." She leaned forward, each word carefully chosen. "Tonight, I have decided to enact a certain experiment, if you will." She watched with interest as the tension thickened in the room, faces growing skeptical. "As we peel back layers, perhaps we will reveal more than mere excuses." She brought forth a small object, a tarnished silver locket. "This was found near the scene of the Reverend's death. Its owner remains a mystery, but I suspect one of you might know more than you let on." Sarah gasped. The atmosphere crackled. "Where did you find it?" "It was in the study, lodged beneath a loose floorboard," Miss Marple explained patiently, watching as shame washed over Edward's face, a fragile mask that crumbled at the very sight of the locket. "I've never seen that before," he spoke hastily, though to Miss Marple his tone rang hollow. As the dim light highlighted his wet hair clinging to his forehead, she noticed the pulse in his neck throb, like a warning bell. "Ah, but you see," she pressed onward, "the locket belonged to someone connected to the Reverend, someone who frequented the manor, perhaps even an adversary." She paused for emphasis, eyes glinting with wisdom and inquiry as they latched onto Robert. "Adversaries walk unseen paths, so tell me, how was your relationship with the Reverend, Master Cressida?" Robert's face flushed, the consequences of his thoughts dawning heavily upon him. "It was merely a transaction of wills, nothing more," he replied, but his voice lacked certainty. "Merely." The word hung in the air like a portent, as Miss Marple chose that moment to strike a nerve. Would the matter of financial wills raise the need for animosity? Would it hide a deeper struggle? As the others exchanged glances, the tension thickened, until Lady Cressida erupted. "No, no more of this. You can't simply accuse us all. You wish to make us doubt each other. Edward wouldn't harm a fly." Her defense felt almost too fierce, and Miss Marple sensed anger masking a deeper fear. Yet one is left to wonder who had the most to gain from silence about the Reverend. Miss Marple continued smoothly, her gaze shifting to Sarah. "What do you say, dear?" The young woman's eyes darted nervously. "Please, I hardly know what you mean. I wanted to protect Lady Cressida." "Protect her from whom?" Miss Marple pressed, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "From the truth, or from yourself?" Another deafening pause enveloped the Shiyun room. The shuffling footsteps of rain against the window grew softer, almost as if the storm itself had paused to listen. Each person shifted in unease, trying to mask their anxiety with indignation. But Miss Marple could scent the fraying threads of trust unraveling before her. "Enough," Edward interjected, his voice cracking. "Shall we not be getting to the point? In the garden, where Lady Cressida claimed to overhear us, I had not gone there to argue. The Reverend had milked out enough from our family's heritage in financial matters. Another shrouded conversation needn't lead to a death warrant." "Yet one seems to be shouting for vengeance," Robert shot back, eyes flaring. "And you appear remarkably calm for someone who could easily be accused of compelling death from outrage." A low rumble of thunder punctuated the tension, at once casting a grim ambiance over the room. It was then that Miss Marple felt a thread of the pulsating truth emerge. "It is evident to me that one of you has much more to gain from the Reverend's silence, perhaps even the means to orchestrate his departure from this world." She watched as Edward paled further, and suddenly she recalled something vital. The nervous stranger she had met, his words echoing in her mind as clearly as the tempest outside. Much that the others ought not to overhear. Before she could articulate her realization, the front door banged open with a force that caught them all off guard. Gasps filled the room as a new figure strode in, drenched yet determined. As the figure stepped into the flickering candlelight, Miss Marple squinted, recognition dawning. "Mr. Collins," she exclaimed, her heart racing, "what have you uncovered?" But even as she welcomed him, she could feel the tide of tension shift, every suspect's eyes capsized with curiosity and fear. What hidden truths would Mr. Collins unveil? Would his arrival drop further clues, despite the swirling storm outside? As he stood there, breathless and resolute, the atmosphere shifted, and Miss Marple braced herself. The storm inside the room rumbled louder than the one outside. With every heartbeat, the final trap tightened around them all, and the impending truth waited like a coiled serpent ready to strike. Chapter 10. A Web of Spineless Deceit. The howling wind rattled the ancient windows of Haverston Manor, mirroring the tumult within the parlour. Rain, heavy and relentless, drummed upon the roof like a persistent harbinger of trouble. Miss Marple stood with a steely resolve, her sharp gaze flitting around the dimly lit room, each suspect cloaked in shadows and suspicion. The air crackled with unspoken tension, as if the very walls trembled in anticipation of a revelation. "Well, Mr. Collins, you appear to have ventured into the eye of the storm," Miss Marple began, her voice calm yet piercing. The newcomer, still shaking off the remnants of the deluge, took a hesitant step forward, his eyes darting from one accused face to another. "I believe I've uncovered something of significance." "What is it?" Robert Cressida snapped, his tone laced with impatience. He shifted uneasily in his chair as the heavy atmosphere seemed to press down upon him. Miss Marple noted the tremor in his voice, an indication that perhaps he was as much of a prisoner of his secrets as the others. Collins took a deep breath. "I was at the church, speaking to a few of the parishioners this evening. They mentioned seeing someone at the manor the night of the Reverend's death, an unfamiliar figure." His voice faltered, the gravity of his next words weighing heavily on him. "A stranger. They said he looked agitated and left quickly." "Do you not see?" Edward Langston burst forth. "That sheds no light on anything. It could have been anyone." His agitation was palpable, as his hands clenched into fists beside him. Was he trying to stave off potential accusations, or was guilt creeping closer? "It may lead somewhere worthwhile," Miss Marple interjected, her tone steady. "What did this stranger look like, Mr. Collins? Did you happen to catch any distinctive marks or features?" Collins frowned in concentration, the candlelight casting flickering shadows across his face. "I didn't get a clear view, but there was something, the way he moved, almost furtively, and his coat. It looked, I don't know, perhaps a bit tattered." He glanced around the room. It felt wrong, out of place for our village. The silence that followed was charged with speculation. "How can we be sure this person even exists?" Lady Cressida questioned, her tone barbed, though a hint of fear tinged her words. "It could easily be a figment of imagination, a wild rumor." Miss Marple leaned back slightly, observing the slight perspiration collecting on Lady Cressida's brow, her hands robustly clutching the pearls at her neck. "Or perhaps it's a matter of convenience, milady," she mused. "It is indeed simpler to dismiss an unknown than to embrace the uncertainty that comes with truth." The ring of her words pierced through the gathered crowd, and Miss Marple's keen eyes fell upon Sarah, who appeared to constantly shrink in her chair. "What say you, dear Sarah? It seems you possess relevant details you have yet to share." The young woman's fingers trembled as she clutched her dress fabric with one hand, the other rising to touch her throat, where her pulse throbbed visibly. I don't know what more I can add," she protested, panic coloring her cheeks. "That stranger had nothing to do with me or anyone here." "Yet the connection looms closer than you think," Miss Marple countered, her arching brow betraying no hint of her own mounting anxiety. "Your words just now speak of instinct and fear. Your connection to the Reverend was more intricate than simple camaraderie, was it not?" Suddenly, Lady Cressida's outburst shattered the quiet. "Enough of this. If it were not for your meddling, Sarah would not feel cornered. Edward, do speak up. You know full well that this is but a wasteful charade." With a newfound intensity, Edward Langston's eyes darkened in alignment with the swirling storm outside. "Let us convene to reason. The words caught in his throat, and for a moment his bravado wavered. "I had nothing to do with the Reverend's death." "Do you not? Or were you simply biding your time, Edward?" Miss Marple probed, her gaze unfurling a demanding presence toward him. "You have much to gain from remaining silent." "Silence," he spat back, the wall he had built cracking. "I am not the one who sought out the Reverend's presence by the dead of night. That was you, Robert. You have more reason to want him out of the way than I do." Robert stiffened, a pulse of red flushes rising to his face. "How dare you? My family has ties to this man. It is business, nothing more. You speak of conspiracies without evidence." His voice was high, desperate. "Yet you resented his attempts to control your legacy," Miss Marple continued, undeterred. "Human nature, especially in dark times, shows itself in curious ways. "You're grasping at straws," Robert shouted, the facade of calm slipping entirely. Suddenly, he generated an air of defensiveness, tinged with desperation, and even Sarah gasped at his change of demeanor. "No, Robert, maybe you should tell us how much your inheritance meant to you," Edward suggested coolly, eyes flickering with a sharpness that hinted at their prior conversations. "Is that why you were so intent on making the Reverend hear you out? Or were you hoping to silence him forever?" With those words, a surge of realization washed over Miss Marple. "My dear friends," she said, weaving through the thick silence that followed, "it seems that our little gathering has entwined itself within a far more sinister web than any of us envisaged. I suspect that within our harrying dialogue lies a very dangerous truth." The room was stiff, the atmosphere electric, before a sudden creak rang from the corner, a floorboard shifting as Lady Cressida moved abruptly to the door. "We cannot linger here," she insisted. "We need to disperse." "Must we, though?" Miss Marple's voice trailed behind her, laced with knowing charm. "Or would we wish to delve deeper into this web of deceit? For once you peel back the layers, there is often one strand that leads us directly to the heart." At that moment, Edward emitted a soft cry, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of revelation was finally too much. "You don't understand," he whispered, image shadowed by internal struggle. Just as Miss Marple opened her mouth to further challenge him, a loud thud echoed, drowning out the heartbeat of tension escalating through the room. It was a book falling from the shelf, its cover creaking open, revealing a hidden envelope tucked within the pages. With a shared glance of mutual dread, they all approached. "What is—" Lady Cressida began, but her question evaporated into the air as Miss Marple, heart racing, snatched the envelope, tearing it open. Inside lay a single slip of paper, smeared somewhat, the ink barely readable, yet one word stood out with haunting clarity: vengeance. "Your little charade may have just turned very much real, my friends," Miss Marple intoned solemnly, sensing the walls closing in as the storm's roar crescendoed outside like a foreboding soundtrack to the revelation. "Are we prepared to account for the deeds that birthed this death? The time has come. For those who wish to remain hidden in darkness, now face an illuminating truth." As the candle flickered ominously, missing its wax point, Miss Marple realized that their search for innocence had thus revealed intent far grimmer than she had previously imagined. Eyeing her companions, she felt the slight inverse of betrayal cast its shadow over their once innocent masks. The truth, intricate and merciless, was about to unravel, revealing the spineless deceit that lay at the heart of Harveston Manor. With every heartbeat, she steeled herself for what came next, knowing they teetered on the precipice of shocking confessions and shattered illusions. Chapter 11. The Stolen Key. The wind howled ferociously at Haveston Manor, its lament echoing through the corridors as if mourning the secrets that clung to the very walls. A flash of lightning illuminated the room for a fleeting moment, revealing Miss Marple standing with the crumpled envelope still in her hand, her expression a mixture of contemplation and determination. Just moments ago, they had unearthed a single word: vengeance. But now a greater mystery loomed over them, which demanded clarity. The candlelight flickered once more, casting wavering shadows against the darkened corners as Miss Marple sensed the atmosphere thickening with unvoiced revelations. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady despite the tempest outside, "we stand at a critical juncture in our pursuit of the truth. Our previous discussions have unveiled threads, threads that now must be woven together to unmask the tapestry of deceit that conceals the key to our mystery. Perhaps that key is not merely figurative, Edward Langston said, looking pensive as he rubbed his forehead. Do we not have a more literal key that has eluded us? A shudder rippled through Lady Cressida, her eyes darting nervously around the room. What do you mean, Edward? The key to the Reverend's study, which has been unaccounted for since his unfortunate demise. I cannot shake the feeling that it holds significance. We must find it. With that, the room was infused with a palpable tension, all eyes fixated on Miss Marple. The quickening of her pulse betrayed the curiosity and dread entwined within her. Yes, the key, she murmured, but we must consider what it unlocks. Perhaps it pertains to more than mere papers and records. Perhaps it is a reflection of our very lives. A sudden clap of thunder punctuated her words, drawing all inward as if to underscore the gravity of their conversation. With a deftness born of practice, Miss Marple glanced towards the corner where the Reverend's belongings had yet to be disturbed. We should search there. His desk may still contain clues. The group hesitated momentarily, a silent consensus forming as they instinctively gravitated towards the study. As they moved, the air hummed with a sense of impending revelation. Miss Marple kept pace with them, her mind racing like the storm outside. If the key to unlocking the truth lay within those four walls, she would surely seize it. Arriving at the study, Edward pushed open the door, which creaked ominously on its rusty hinges. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the sense of dusty leather and old parchment, a world untouched since the Reverend last occupied it. Miss Marple took an immediate interest in the opulent desk at the center of the room, the wood polished but fading, appearing to guard a wealth of untold stories. Search for a hidden drawer or compartment, anything that would require a key, she instructed sharply, and at her behest, they split into pairs, riffling through the contents of the room. I think I've found something, Sarah exclaimed, her voice steady with newfound confidence. Leaning over a stack of letters, she pointed to a small brass key hidden beneath the bottom layer, its surface tarnished with age. Could this be it? With eyes wide, Miss Marple stepped forward, fingers hovering over the key. It may very well be, but we must ascertain that it fits before we grow too hasty. Edward watched with rapt attention, every muscle tensed in anxious anticipation. Where do we try it? The desk? Miss Marple shook her head slowly, a thoughtful furrow creasing her brow. No, I feel that it would be too obvious. We must consider the places the Reverend held in higher regard. Perhaps that hidden nook where he kept personal items of import. The laughter of the storm outside faded as Miss Marple led the group towards a dusty old cabinet tucked away in the shadowy alcove. Its doors appeared innocuous, but they bore intricate carvings, revealing the clumsy craftsmanship of a local artisan. Carefully, she grasped the key and inserted it into the lock. The mechanism clicked with a gratifying sound. As the door creaked open, a wave of mustiness greeted them, accompanied by a few scattered journals and correspondence. But it was a smaller leather-bound book that caught Miss Marple's eye. She gently pulled it from the shelf, feeling the weight of its significance. Just then, a sound from the main entrance caught their ears, a muffled voice. "Do you hear that?" Robert whispered, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "It's someone outside the manor." Miss Marple exchanged knowing glances with Edward. "We should not ignore it. It may be the stranger Collins described, the one who moved with such furtiveness." Or it could be a villager seeking shelter from the storm. Sarah interjected apprehensively, a quiver in her words. Then let us not leap to conclusions, but exercise prudence, Miss Marple replied firmly, busying herself, with the journal now sitting in her hands. Inside, notes penned in hurried scrawl caught her gaze. Fragments of thought danced across the pages, a blend of the Reverend's musings on morality and Byzantine notes pertaining to village affairs. The mention of a particular name, however, drew Miss Marple's focus, prompting her to pause sharply. The key to understanding our past is in the shadows of Haverston, she read out loud, her voice barely above a whisper. A sudden silence enveloped them, the insinuation hanging heavy in the air. Then, like clockwork, the door swung open, the wild wind gusting into the room as a drenched figure stood framed in the doorway, his presence casting an enigmatic shadow against the flickering light. All attention swung towards the newcomer, breathless with the weight of unasked questions. "Forgive my intrusion," the stranger said, voice gravelly as thunder rolled behind him, "but I believe I may hold the remaining pieces to this unholy puzzle." With that revelation, tension surged through the room, and Miss Marple felt the stirrings of revelation against the heavy backdrop of the storm. It became clear that they were no longer merely pawns in a greater game. They had stepped onto a path bewilderingly interwoven with secrets and lies. The key to the mystery, once spirited away, now tantalizingly lingered on the brink of discovery. Her heart raced with renewed vigor as pieces of the labyrinthine riddle began to align. The storm outside warranted their urgent pursuit of the truth, and Miss Marple ushered her companions onward, determined to illuminate the dark corners of Haverston Manor before secrets swallowed them whole. Just as her resolve solidified, she sensed the faint beginnings of a broader, far more complex game, leaving the promise of truth hanging dangerously in the air. And with that, as the thunder rumbled on, so too did the secrets of Haverston begin stirring, ready to uncoil and reveal what lay beneath the surface of their quiet village. Chapter 12. A Truth Not Quite Hidden. The storm raged outside Haverston Manor, an ominous symphony of thunder and rain that drummed insistently against the windows. Inside, however, a different tempest swirled amongst the guests, gathered in the Reverend's study, their expressions reflecting a mix of uncertainty and fatigue. Miss Marple stood at the threshold, her keen eyes fixed unwaveringly on the unexpected stranger who had intruded upon their gathering. A man drenched by the elements, his hair plastered to his forehead, yet framed with a countenance that hinted at both gravitas and desperation. "Who might you be, and what do you know of our unfortunate circumstances?" Miss Marple inquired, her voice calm but authoritative, cutting through the clamour of wind and rain. "I came to Haverston to deliver a truth long concealed," the stranger replied, his voice thick with emotion. He stepped further into the room, water pooling at his feet, and unveiled a crumpled piece of parchment. From within his damp coat, the flickering candlelight revealed the lines of faded ink as he fought against the howling winds of the storm. "This letter, it belongs to the Reverend. It contains secrets that connect our past with present tragedies." Miss Marple stepped forward, her instincts prickling with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Might we also inquire your name, sir?" "Indeed. My name is Thomas Blythe, a student of the Reverend's teachings. I've returned to the village only recently, seeking closure, or perhaps answers." He gestured toward the letter. It all started with a promise made in this very manner. What sort of promise? Lady Cressida's tone was skeptical, betraying her unease, yet she leaned slightly toward Thomas, her attention riveted to the letter. A vow of forgiveness, he replied solemnly. Forgiveness tied to a grievous past, a past that haunts our village. The Reverend had confided in me during his later years, sharing whispers of wrongs done and debts unincurred. Vengeance. That word is one I've heard echoes of, lingering in the air as I return to the village, as tangible as the rain now falling. As Thomas spoke, Miss Marple felt the tension in the room shift. Something vital was about to emerge, not merely a recounting, but an unveiling of motives obscured by grit and grief. She gestured for him to continue. In this letter, the Reverend wrote of an unspeakable event surrounding a local tragedy. Forgive me if I speak too boldly, but it was concerning the death of his wife Eliza many years ago. He believed that the quiet village had turned its back, allowing shadows to fester while the guilty roamed free. Guilty? Edward Langston interjected, his brow furrowed. If that's the case, then how does our recent murder tie to these long-buried horrors? A pivotal clue lies within these words, Thomas said, unfurling the document and presenting it to Miss Marple. Here, the Reverend mentioned a secret meeting intended to expose a dangerous union hidden among the villagers. He named names, but the ink smudged here at the crucial moment. Miss Marple leaned closer, peering at the script as the others crowded around her. What was meant to be exposed, she murmured, the gears of deduction turning rapidly in her mind. A family feud entwined with misfortune. Two families suffered deeply over a failed alliance, betrayal that led to lost lives, especially Eliza's, Thomas explained, tapping a finger on what appeared to be a nearly illegible name scrawled haphazardly beneath the smudge. I suspected there was more than mere sorrow within this letter, a motive pursued through time. Could the Reverend have known the truth about who was responsible for his wife's demise? Miss Marple straightened, her heart thrumming with a mix of realization and urgency. If the events from the past bleed into our present, then what came to light cannot be dismissed. Who else could have had a hand in the Reverend's demise? I believe, the stranger hesitated, glancing toward Lady Cressida before continuing, that it could all lead to connections among us in this very room. His voice trembled with palpable tension. Thomas, would you dare imply such a thing? Lady Cressida's voice wavered, her eyes darting nervously. Vengeance left threads uncut, designs woven tightly, he pressed. The Reverend's notes mentioned two key villagers who had more than a passing interest in his affairs. I fear that what lay hidden was not merely fate or ill luck, but systematic errors. The storm outside may merely mask the tumult brewing within. Then who? Robert spoke up, his voice steadier than before, glancing at each member present with newfound suspicion. Who could harbor the fury needed for an act as terrible as murder? Miss Marple stepped back, her mind racing. The names hinted at in the letter could weave a tapestry she had yet to unfold. She surveyed the group around her, their fear mingled with culpability, each lost in thoughts of desperation. Every one of you, she began slowly, has been drawn into an intricate dance of fate. Secrets linger in the shadows, concealing intent masked in grief, resentment, and perhaps even love. Love? Thomas echoed, his surprise evident. Yes, Miss Marple pressed, because it's often hidden motives that bear the sharpest edges. Edward, you wished to protect the Reverend's legacy. Didn't you once care for his family? Where do your loyalties lie when the storm of past grievances awakens? Edward clenched his jaw, his eyes flickering with realization and dread. I only desired to shield the truth. We all bear burdens from years past. Just then, a crack of thunder rented through the air, the timbre of its sound coinciding with a chilling thought that wrapped around Miss Marple's mind. Though his life may have ended in tragedy, the Reverend was not powerless. What if he had discovered something about the night of Eliza's death? Something that might confirm a legacy born on the cusp of betrayal. The room fell deathly silent, the heaviness of revelation pulsing in the air. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Was it possible that the breakthrough needed to piece together the enigma lay in the unraveling of hearts? She cast a glance at the door, her instincts insisting that they must not remain stagnant now. We must move swiftly. The shadows of Haverston cannot remain veiled, she concluded, her tone resolute. In our quest for vengeance, we risk forsaking innocence along the way. We must confront the very ghosts that linger amongst us and illuminate the truth, however dark its visage. As thunder resounded again, echoing the urgency of their plight, Miss Marple reached for the letter. The storm outside bore witness not only to nature's fury, but to the ferocity of secrets that lay in wait. The bold stamp of fate pressed upon them as Miss Marple braced herself for the final confrontation, her heart steeled, realizing they stood on the precipice of unmasking a truth not quite hidden. But as the rain intensified outside, so too did the sense of foreboding within the manor, leaving her aching with the anticipation of what revelations awaited and who among them would ultimately be left standing when the last veil was pulled aside.